Tom? Okay, thank you. Hi, it's Cindy Moorcroft. I am completing Learning Communities Video Personal Reflection for Module 2, Week 1 assignment. Our assignment was to talk about how we think about Module 1 and identity, and Module 2, learning communities or learning environments. So I really enjoyed Module 1. It was fun to think about my own identity, and I very much believe that a teacher knowing his or her identity and knowing the identity of his or her students is really important in teaching them. In the massage world, where I've been teaching for the last 20 years, we would always say to our students, it's really important for you to know yourself. Only by knowing yourself can you really distinguish your own issues from your client's issues and help your client to sort out his or her issues as best you can. And it's different in teaching, I think, but there are some common threads about the importance of knowing one's identity. So in the reading, some of the readings that most struck me in Module 1 about identity was first the piece, A Search Past Silence, where Derek, a student, a young black man, and Mrs. Crenshaw, his teacher, had a communication, and Mrs. Crenshaw hadn't been able to recognize Derek was a writer by what he produced in class, but when she found his diary and read a bit from that, she knew he was a writer, and she chose to ask him, when she gave him his diary back, what can I do to help you succeed in my class? Those weren't the exact words, but something like that. And he declined to take on her assistance for help. She didn't ask herself what she as a teacher could have changed to have brought out Derek's writing ability, or how she could have changed how she perceived writing or literacy. So that was notable to me. I also liked the various articles we looked at about newcomers coming to the United States and how their identity would be different than somebody who grew up in upstate New York or grew up in this country. We looked at transgender youth and how they would have a different identity or different aspects of their identity than cisgendered youth. We read about families coming from a different structure, different standard structure than mother, father, and children, and how the identity of those students could be different from students with a more standard or traditional family. During Module 1, I considered my own identity. So some of the aspects that that are most important to me about my identity include being a parent, being a partner, being a teacher, being a massage therapist, being a vegetarian, being a lifelong learner, particularly a learner who asks a lot of questions, being an athlete. I'm also white, female, short, and a lesbian. Some of my personal preferences, I think of personal preferences or just qualities about me that are part of my identity as well, include the fact that I'm spiritual, I'm organized, I'm too rigid sometimes. I love color and African drumming and being outside and studying anatomy. So I came away from Module 1 with a greater understanding of the importance of knowing my own identity and the identities of my students. I want to be consistently aware of how my identity gives me a particular lens through which I see the world. And that might be a different lens than the one my students use to see their world. For example, as a vegetarian, I'm very aware of what's on menus at restaurants in a way that someone who has more choices of what they eat might not think to notice. As a person who grew up in neighborhoods where I could dribble my basketball up and down the street late at night and feel safe, I might not know exactly what it feels like to grow up in a neighborhood where there are drive-by shootings. One more example. As a lesbian parent, I'm aware of standardized forms that have mother and father, and that I've had to cross out and change things on. And someone who came from a different kind of family might not have noticed, might not have had an awareness of the impact of those forms. So what does this mean? Again, I want to ensure that my lens is open enough and flexible enough that I can see my students as close to how they see themselves as is possible for me. So to me, this means being thoughtful, particularly about the language I use, trying to use inclusive language when I speak to students and colleagues. It means developing trust. I want to ask questions of my students, hopefully questions they'll be willing to answer, so that I can get to know them and their backgrounds and their families and what they're excited about learning and what their preferences are. And I want to encourage them to see themselves as powerful and capable and strong. So in Module 2, we begun to look at communities or learning environments. And after reading the Bronfenbrenner's ecological framework, it occurred to me that Module 2, learning environments, didn't mean how one would set up the classroom and the decor and the structure, but rather other learning environments like family and school and church and neighborhood and so on, the different environments beyond the immediate classroom. I like the Funds of Knowledge article. We had a Module 1 article about Funds of Knowledge, and again in Module 2, and I think it's essential to use talents and knowledge, skills, expertise of family members to help students learning. I loved the candy example where a teacher took that one particular candy selling aspect of her students' identity and made a whole amazing class project out of that. I think what caused me to think the most was Chapter 3 in Jacqueline Jordan Irvine's book about does race matter in teaching. So I've been thinking a lot about how my race as a white person will impact my students' learning and my ability to connect with them. One thought I have is that I can't remember the name of what Patricia Jordan, whoever wrote the Chapter 3, Cooper wrote, independent white teachers. Part of me wants to make sure I can be an independent white teacher if that's what it takes to reach black students as well as black teachers can. Some of what we looked at in Module 1 about identity and trying to, recognizing the lens through which I see the world and trying to be as aware as I can of my students' perspectives will help me. And then there was a whole interesting piece about traditional and non-traditional ways of teaching and disciplining that white teachers versus black teachers have had varied success at, or has been important to different teachers, sort of based on the research in that book. So I definitely want to learn some more about that. I want to end by talking about a comment, an interaction that I had with one of my fellow interns, Samuel, in my learning group. And in our preparation for Jigsaw number 2, he asked me if I thought as a white person, if he thought my being a white teacher would have an impact on how I taught or reached students of color. And I guess that was a hard question to face in a group setting, and I answered him with, yes, I'm a white person, and I have the background and experience that I do have, and I think that I'll have a different way of teaching than had I grown up with as a black person and experienced the racism that black people are subject to in our culture. So I've been thinking a lot about what do I need to do to really connect, making sure my awareness is as full as it can possibly be, and how to feel comfortable knowing that, yes, I'm a white person who wants to teach in the Albany School District, and how to celebrate that and keep working on being the best teacher I can from my perspective. I liked at the end of the Chapter 3 in the Irvine book where that author Patricia Cooper of that chapter sort of said. So really what's needed for all teachers is, in particular white teachers, deep respect for the black community, resistance to the status quo. That means black children, black families are not treated equally and don't have as many resources. A belief that I can make a difference as a teacher, high expectations of my students, which I intend to have, and to continue to develop a racial consciousness, a political consciousness. So that's my intent as I move forward. Thank you.